So it's lovely to see everybody here today. And I'm just going to make a quick outline for any of you that haven't joined us before on a learning lunch, just to let you know what they're all about. So our shared world, we started the learning lunches with the idea really of showcasing and sharing and amplifying the work of people within our shared world and friends of our shared world. So those of us working around education for a fairer and fitter future, I guess. And so what we do is we have a 15-minute session, a speaker who comes to talk about their work. Today we've got Arran Stibbe. I'll let Morgan introduce him in just a moment. And then we all have a question that we go into breakout rooms and discuss. So that's your chance really to get to know people. Because the other thing that's great about the learning lunches is you get a chance to meet new faces, find other people, and there's a bit of sort of solidarity and connection around that. So Morgan, can I hand over to you?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to quickly introduce Arran, then we can get into hearing from him, which I'm really looking forward to. So I've known Arran since I think about 2003 when he became my PhD tutor halfway through my PhD, and it was great to work with him then. So it's lovely to be back connecting, Arran. And yeah, thank you for that as well. It was a massive help when you came on board. It was really great. So I've one little announcement actually, if it's okay. We published an open letter last week to Bridget Phillipson, the Secretary of State for Education, calling for climate and sustainability education to be more tightly integrated into the next national curriculum. I'll post a link to that in the chat. But yeah, we'd love you to sign up. We've had over 550 signatories at this point, including some of the really high profile kind of climate scientists and education academics. So it's gathering momentum, which is great. But Arran, so Arran's Professor of Ecolinguistics at University of Gloucester. He's the founder of the International Ecolinguistics Association. He's authored several books, including Animals Erased, which is a discourse, ecology, and reconnection with nature. And this book, Ecolinguistics, which I'm reading at the moment, so it's language ecology and the stories we live by. And as part of that book, Arran also created a free online course called The Stories We Live By. Again, I'll post a link to that in the chat as well, which is a fantastic free resource for coming to understand more of the issues that Arran's going to be talking to us about today. So Arran's talk, I'm going to hand over to you now, Arran, is on eco-narrative and ethical leadership.
Excellent. So thanks very much, Morgan. And I'm very pleased to be invited to give this talk today. And I've only got 15 minutes, so I will zoom into it and I will put my timer on just to make sure that I notice the time. So just give me a moment while I share my screen. So I'm going to start with this very clear statement, which for me is very obvious, that our current industrial civilization is unsustainable. And we can see that very clearly when we look at the carbon emissions that we need to reduce by. So we need to get down to net zero by 2050 if we want to keep warming below 1.6 degrees. So when you look at this graph, it's going down massively, a massive reduction in emissions. But at the same time, the population is increasing to 9.7 billion by 2050. And I just read today in The Guardian, 60% of adults over 25 are expected to be overweight or living with obesity by 2050. Meat production is set to increase by 70% by 2050, air travel by 76%, plastics set to double by 2050, global freight transport, which is quite a good proxy for the amount of stuff that we're consuming, set to increase by 260% by 2050. Chemical production projected to triple by 2050. So the graphs are going in completely opposite directions. And the reason for mentioning this is to talk about the scale of what is needed. So it's not just about swapping to electric cars and having solar panels. We need to change the fundamental basis of our whole society. So the scale of changes is so vast that we need to change the stories that we live by. And this is where we need ethical leadership. And I will just summarize really what I mean by this, just in 4 points to begin with. So we can be ethical leaders if we define our own value system or ecosophy, if we become critically aware of the stories that shape our current unsustainable society, we search for or create new stories to live by, and we communicate those stories in inspiring ways. And this is what I'm saying that ethical leaders do. So I'm going to start with COVID. So COVID was a crisis, and we responded to that crisis with huge changes. So all the planes were grounded and car journeys restricted and social gatherings just ended. Massive social changes. And there was some optimism that if we can make those kinds of changes, then we can also deal with the larger issues of climate change and biodiversity loss. So the commentator Sonne Renee Taylor said during COVID that we will not go back to normal. Before COVID, we normalized greed, inequality, depletion, extraction, rage, hoarding, and hate. We have been given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. So there's that lovely metaphor of stitching a new garment. And then Arundhati Roy says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their worlds anew. This is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. So if we're going to stitch a new garment, and if we're going to go through that portal, we will need ethical leadership at every level, at the level of families, of NGOs, of education, of business, and of government. So, very briefly, in terms of theories of leadership, this is the one that I like by Smirchich and Morgan. Leadership is realized in the process whereby one or more individuals succeeds in attempting to frame and define the reality of others. They emerge as leaders because of their role in framing experience in a way that provides a viable basis for action. So this links the words, the communication with how people see the world, and that links to their action. So leadership is about changing the world through changing how people see the world and therefore how they act in the world. But that's just leadership. We also have to think about ethical leadership. And for me, ethical leadership is based on a value system or an ecosophy. Ecosophy is a values framework which considers humans as well as other species in the physical environment. We can't just have a value system which considers humans only, because then we will create a perfectly equal, wonderful society that consumes too much and is unsustainable and will collapse. So I would say it's fundamental to ethical leadership that you consider more than just the human. You have to consider animals, plants, forests, rivers, and the ecosystems that life depends on. So an example of an ecosophy, this is Vandana Shiva. She says, I evolved the concept of earth democracy on the basis of my philosophy and practice that we are part of the earth, and human freedom and human well-being depends on other species. We're not superior to other species. We are interbeings. So she's explicitly defined her ecosophy, and she uses that to base her communication on. And she does communicate well and reaches a lot of audiences and has led to some people to change how they see the world. Okay, so this is my definition of ethical leadership, putting everything very briefly for now, because I've only got 15 minutes. So ethical leadership occurs when one person attempts to define the reality of others according to their own ecosophy. And I'm saying ethical leadership occurs because I see leadership as something that happens. You don't have people who are ethical leaders. And if you do say somebody is an ethical leader, then they're bound to disappoint you in some way. Even with Gandhi, say, then it's like, oh, well, you find something about what he did in South Africa. So it's not that people are ethical leaders, it's that they do ethical leadership through their words. An example is Ray Anderson, who I'm sure you've all heard of Ray Anderson, the chair of Interface, one of the largest manufacturers in the world. And I've got one quote from him that he says, by society's definition, I am a captain of industry, a modern day hero. And Ray Anderson, he's died now, but he was very good at communicating sustainability messages. And he did it using narrative and he did it using identity. So he is saying what the social identity is of a leader in our current society. This is the story that we live by around leadership. But then he says, for 21 years, I never gave a thought to what we were taking from the earth or doing to the earth. But then, at a propitious moment, a book landed on my desk. It was Paul Hawken's Ecology of Commerce. Early in this journey, I realized that the way I was running Interface is the way of the plunderer. So I said to myself, my goodness, one day people like me will end up in jail. So he's left that identity of the captain of industry. He's taken on this identity as the plunderer of the earth, somebody stealing things that belong to all species. And of course, that's a very unstable identity to take. So he later becomes a green business leader. He transforms his company and then he goes around and he gives a lot of speeches to other companies. So it's a narrative, it's an autobiographical narrative where he changes his identity. It's a powerful form of communication. So ethical leadership. So I've talked about Ray Anderson as a CEO, or Vandana Shiva as like a prominent global activist. But ethical leadership is something that can happen at all different levels. As I was saying, it could happen at the family level. So what about parents? Parents choosing what books for their children, what texts their children are exposed to. So shaping their children's reality. So let's say a parent chooses Little Red Riding Hood. This is a version from 1810, one of the earliest versions. And you can see the first that she met going along was this ravenous wolf, so artful and strong. And of course, this is a cautionary tale. It's telling women to avoid lecherous men. And you can see that the wolf is also, implicated here. So it's a story really about lecherous men, but it contains certain entailments about wolves, that wolves are evil, that wolves need to be killed and destroyed in painful ways. And so this is kind of the legend of the wolf that you get in so many stories, is that they're evil and deserving of destruction. And even now in Sweden, they are culling wolves. So one thing that parents can do is don't stop them from reading Little Red Riding Hood, but you can help children to become critically aware of Little Red Riding Hood and think about the wolf and the messages around the wolf. And are wolves really like that? So that's critical awareness with the children. But you can also choose books that represent a different view. So this is Little Red Hat by Bridget Irvin, and she was influenced by ecolinguistics. And she produced this alternative version of Little Red Riding Hood. And it starts with this image of harmony where the wolves are living in the forest and they are a family and they're all happy. And this can be seen in terms of Todorov's 5 stages of narrative. So Todorov says narratives often start with a harmonious situation at the beginning, which he calls equilibrium. Then there's a breakdown of harmony. This is the degeneration. And there's a recognition of the loss of equilibrium. And then there's some efforts to resolve the disruption, which he calls improvement. And then finally, there's a restoration of equilibrium, which is just restoration. So here we have the degeneration. So this is a marvelous reversal of the story, because now we've got the bulldozers and they're the ones who have the big teeth and the big eyes. And the wolves now are the victims. And there is no resolution to this. It says, don't let this be the end. And so there is instead a call to action. So she says, learn more about wolves and give some websites. So this is encouraging the reader to be part of the narrative, to go out there and make a difference. And you see this in a lot of eco-narratives. They don't end up with restoration and perfect harmony. They end up with the world is in a degenerated state. You need to go out and make a difference. And we have this marvelous film by George Monbiot, How Wolves Change Rivers. And in this film, he looks at Yellowstone Park and how when they introduced wolves, the deer were moved from place to place, the forest regenerated, wildlife returned, and the rivers actually changed course because their banks were now stabilized. It is this great narrative about what happens when you reintroduce an apex predator. I don't have time to show it to you, unfortunately. So yeah, this is a narrative. And I say a narrative is a type of story that involves characters, locations, and a sequence of logically connected events. It's much more than that, but that's my basic definition of it. But it's also an eco-narrative. And an eco-narrative is a narrative that involves not just humans, but also other species interacting with each other and the physical environment. And eco-narratives are incredibly important for communicating in ways that encourage people to notice and care about other species and the ecosystems that life depends on. But it's not actually the deer that are the problem. It is cows and sheep. And if you look at the the land use for lamb and beef, it's enormous. If you look at the carbon emissions from lamb and beef, it's enormous. And then we have this vast advertising industry pushing us to eat more and more meat. And then we have campaigns to try to get us to eat less meat, like this one from Greenpeace. But it's not really the cow's fault, and it's not really the farmer's fault. It's not even the corporation's fault. The problem is the global economic system, which is encouraging consumers to buy more and more things. It's rewarding companies for the amount of money they make, not for how much they benefited the world. So we need new stories, not just at the small level, but also stories about the global economy. We need to rethink our entire political and economic system at a very deep level. And that's why we have stories like from Kate Raworth about donut economics. And I won't go into donut economics, but it is a different way of thinking about the economy. So that was a real whistle-stop tour of eco-narrative and its importance of searching for news stories to live by. And I will end there.
Fabulous, Arran. Thank you so much. It is really hard, isn't it? Only having 15 minutes, but you've given us lots of thoughts and nuggets there. And I just wanted to share with everybody the question that we've got a little provocation for you to think about in your breakout. So we're going to pop you in breakout rooms now. And the question is, how can ethical leadership articulate realistic but hopeful visions of the future? So do introduce yourselves when you're in your rooms and have a little bit of time. You'll have about 10 minutes to chew on that together. I'm sure that was far too short. It always is, but with any luck, you had a chance to connect a little bit with some people in your room and discuss this topic here, how ethical leadership can articulate realistic but hopeful visions of the future. So I'm just wondering if anyone wants to feed back from any of the rooms, if anybody's feeling brave. I think we had 4 rooms altogether. Does anybody want to be brave and go first?
I think we should share something that Les told me, which was just amazing.
Go for it.
These young people apparently did a presentation, Les, didn't they? And they were talking about social media and obviously stories.
Yeah. So this was a presentation by some 17-year-olds about what they felt climate education should be about, and they gave an example of a clip of some polar bears slipping off an ice sheet, and yeah, 12 million hits for that. Another video about renewable energy, 9,000 hits. So they were kind of saying, we know this turn's kind of received wisdom on its head, but actually the polar bear wins, and you kind of inferred from that.
I went to a sort of a last hurrah of the Sustainable Development Commission and basically people, no one wants it to end, but apparently it was the last hurrah. And it was staggering because, up until 2011, when I went to those meetings as commissioner, I would say it was all about data, rationality, theory. Here's my model. Here's my framework, that kind of thing. And my goodness, there were 20 people in that room and they were talking emotionally. They were talking much more from the heart. And I was stunned, so even old people can actually change their minds eventually. And one of the things that impressed me most was that Professor Tim Jackson, who wrote the book Prosperity Without Growth, because Les and I were talking about, the growth narrative. And he absolutely got it in the neck for that book from everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And I think he never realized it was going to upset some people, so much. And he's thought about it. He's a philosopher, so he's thought about this long and hard. And he's decided actually his book wasn't about growth. His book was about care. So his new book that's coming out in April, maybe we can get him to talk online with us, has got care in the title. And, that was completely this new narrative that he's come up with. So that's what we talked about.
It reminds me of Weintraub's Weintraub. I forget her first name, but she talks about a culture of uncare and needing to change that story into a culture of care. Thanks, Anne.
Andy
Any other?
Andy had his hand up.
Yeah,
Andy, hello.
Hi, it's just super briefly. I put a link in the chat to some work that a guy called Sam Conniff is leading about uncertainty. And I was just saying in our group that I think learning to love uncertainty is one of the prerequisites of ethical leadership, because we have to lead with questions, not answers. And that the old style of leaderships are so much about being right and knowing what things to do, rather than bring people into that space. And to your point, Anne, I think the word love is still noticeably absent from its discussions in this general space about its importance as part of the kind of engine of change. Thank you.
Fantastic. Any other? I'm painfully aware we're already over the time. So thank you very much for having those conversations. And I'm just going to pass over to Anne, who's going to tell us a little bit about the next Learning Lunch.
Okay. I'm just realizing how much, Arran, thank you so much for that, how it connects to both Morgan's talk last week and last month, and even the one before that with Tom Crompton and I think it was Ruth, I can't remember now exactly, but from Common Cause, there's this sort of, this thread running through, and all of these are available. We get them up on the Our Shared World website. So if you put Our Shared World without spaces.net, you'll get to it. So these are all available to follow up. And we've been running these now from Kathy's lovely first idea on the first Tuesday of every month. But it turns out the first Tuesday of April is April Fool's Day. So we sort of panicked about that one and thought we might go for the next Tuesday, but now we've messed up. So hold the 7th or the 8th, because I've managed to get Jonathan Porritt to come and talk, and I think he's going to talk about campaigning. He's been campaigning since he was 18, and I think he might well be heading into 80 now. I'm not quite sure how old he is. So his experience, what's worked, what's not, because quite a lot of NGOs and people in this space do think about campaigning, but it'd be very interesting to link it back to what Arran just said there. So it'll be Jonathan Porritt. It'll be at 1 o'clock, and it's either going to be the 7th or the 8th. We're hoping to go for the 7th, which is a Monday, rather than the 8th, which is the Tuesday. But I'll get back to you on that one. Sarah, what?
Yeah, it's usually we usually start at 1:15.
Sorry, 1:15.
Yep. Okay. Just being a pedant.
But as I say, all of this is available on the Our Shared World website. So you'll be able to look at some of the fantastic talks that we've had. And Arran, yours will be going up quite soon. And hopefully, if you've got any links or other ideas of things that people could follow up with, it was great reading, seeing those books that you think you were recommending. And Morgan, thank you for introducing Arran and recommending Arran's books as well. Brilliant.
Lovely. Thanks very much, everyone. Look forward to seeing you next time. And just to highlight Arran's link there to that free course on the stories we live by, which has lots more materials and ideas around this that you might like to use.